Welcome to Cardiovisual's Instagram. I'm so excited to talk to you, Dr. Anand, about breathonance and all the work that you're doing. So, first off, though, you work as a pulmonologist, and sleep medicine are your areas of expertise in Boston. What drew you to this field?
I was always fascinated by breath, Seema. Growing up in India, I grew up in a family that was steeped in the yoga tradition. I remember my grandfather at age 85, practicing yoga while standing on his head and had a prolonged breathwork and meditation practice. And it intrigued me from a very young age. My mother was a physician. I was attracted to the medical field and worked at a hospital which served as the largest tetanus ward in the country. It's a disease that is not really even understood all that much or seen in the West because most people get vaccinated at birth for this. But it's a crippling ailment for those who get afflicted because they're fully awake while their body goes into contortion with spasm for almost 2 to 3 weeks. And when they would come into the hospital, we would admit them to the ICU. Once they'd liberated from the ventilator, the first thing that they would say would be, just to breathe again.
Wow.
And it would strike me that this act, this human act, which starts with the first cry and ends with the last gasp, is taken for granted most of the time. Moving into, my training as a fellow in pulmonary and critical care medicine, in Boston, it was also breath. I was fascinated with breathing physiology. It always fascinated me.
You're right. I mean, we take it for granted, but you're not alive without breathing. It's so critical. I'm curious that when you were in India studying medicine and seeing your mom as a physician who was a practicing physician in India, and then coming to the United States and finishing your medical degrees in the United States, did you feel a disconnect between the yogic traditions and maybe perhaps how you even saw your mom practice medicine compared to what you were learning in the U.S.?
Oh, most definitely. In India, it was a very hands-on approach because in certain parts of the world, we don't have the area of technology that supports clinical diagnosis. So it was really touching, listening, feeling, holding, the patient's hand. Over here, it's, you have a heart murmur, you get an echo. You have a headache, you get a scan. And there was a big disconnect between, that human aspect of patient care and the technological sophistication of patient care, which I learned in the West. And it was kind of a bridging of those two that when I sort of, embraced my yogic upbringing, if you will, my Indian upbringing, there was a yearning to kind of bring that across to the Western paradigm. And that's how these worlds collided for me.
When was that aha moment that you're like, I'm going to bring this breath work to my patients and to people?
It was actually in 1990 when I first came to the US. I was working in a holistic health clinic um, where they taught yoga, they taught yoga therapy, they taught asana and pranayama as practices, including all the other sort of pillars of health, nutrition and meditation. Uh, Ironically, I had to learn this in the US, having trained as a Western doctor in India. It was then that I was pretty curious and pretty certain that this was a very valuable part of caregiving that needed to be embraced by the Western world.
To define pranayama breathing, which is the core, right, of what you're also teaching, it goes back thousands of years in India. Can you define that for us?
Yeah, so pranayama is one word, but it has the roots prana and yama. Prana is vital energy or the vital force that animates all of existence, whether you're animate or inanimate. Yama is the act of controlling, extending, or manipulating that vital energy.
Mm-hmm.
And there are many pathways to pranayama. Turns out that harnessing the human act of breathing is a very safe and tangible way of enlivening that energetic principle in our awareness. So that's what pranayama is about.
So with these breathing techniques, so I want to know about some specific conditions, but first in general for everyone, how can this help people?
The principles of pranayama are about making you a slower breather. If you had to just pay attention to how fast you're breathing right now, it's anywhere between 15 to 18 breaths per minute. Most pranayamis or most breathwork practitioners will learn how to breathe at much slower rates, somewhere between 4 and 7 breaths per minute, which is what is called the resonant frequency of the human being for breathing. At those breathing rates, you obviously have to breathe larger volumes of breath
Uh-huh.
to keep up with gas exchange. But there are incredible physiological changes that occur in the human, including a drop in blood pressure and heart rate, the enhancement of gas exchange. So your saturations go up and your CO2 levels re-equilibrate. You become a more upright breather. Your spine sort of starts to get a little more upright. So you feel much more freer in terms of your breath capacity. But most importantly, there is also balance and there's peace and there's calm that envelops the experience.
Mm.
So there are many benefits with becoming a slow, large volume, upright nostril breather.
Ah, so okay. So when you were talking about that with the blood pressure, then if you're looking at conditions, right? So and being on Cardiovisual's site, how do you think this could help um, heart patients, patients that are concerned about heart health?
So one of the most common sort of conditions is diurnal hypertension. So a lot of folks, as they age, they develop issues with the blood pressure, both in the waking state and especially at night. They also tend to have afflictions of heart rhythm. So atrial fibrillation, atrial flutter, the slow rhythms as the conduction system of the heart decays. And then obviously at the end of the spectrum, there are folks who have problems with the pump itself, heart failure, congestive heart failure. Breath work touches all. It touches the function of the pump, it touches the rhythm of the heart, and it also augments gas exchange by virtue of the interaction between heart and lung.
Like as I listen to you, I think like, like the Western medicine thinking because we silo so many parts that at first the thought could be, well, how could your breath impact your heart, right? Because the thinking is so used to every organ being on its own. But when you start thinking about the body all working together as it actually does, that makes sense of the influence of the breath having such a profound impact. And then, okay, so you were talking about the nostril, the nose, and the how important that is in breathing. Um, and I have heard too about it being closest to the brain. So how does that work, and how can it help cognitive function?
Yeah, so one of the most important receptors for this vital energy sits in the roof of the nose. And enlivening that receptor through a nostril practice is one of the pillars of a pranayama tradition. It turns out that that receptacle is very close to the brain also.
Mhm.
In fact, the roof of the nose is separated by a sliver of bone with the brain. And it's connected not only through the olfactory apparatus, which is responsible for smell, but it also modulates central autonomic tone. And so the autonomic nervous system, those centers in the brain that sort of regulate autonomic activity, are actually affected by the nostril breath. It also turns out that the centers for emotion, the amygdala, are also very closely connected with pathways from the nose. The centers for memory consolidation also connected to the pathways from the nose. So lots of neural connections, which we are now starting to appreciate
Mhm.
in the field of neuroscience. But memory consolidation, emotional regulation, central autonomic tone as it regulates blood pressure and heart work, all because of a nostril practice.
it makes sense. Like, you smell something and it takes you back to a place, right? That you can almost feel that you're there. And then all of this like essential oils. I have my grounding essential oil right here. I'm like, oh, that's why. So it's so interesting. And then, I've shared with you guys before too about, I recovered for some surgeries and I would use a lot of this breathing, and it really helped me cognitively repair. I felt like get memory back that I didn't have, that I felt like I was lacking um, prior to doing this. So I would do it, it was working, it was helping, but I had no idea like how exactly, like physiologically, what is happening to make it work.
It's true. I mean, I'm delighted that you have embraced this kind of strategy, not, you know, because you wanted to, but because of some challenge. And hopefully it'll keep you happy and healthy sort of going forward. But just to speak to your point about how, in medical school, I was never taught how to breathe. We as humans are never taught how to breathe. It's one thing that we don't learn in the medical curriculum, even as students, even as fellows. And I trained at some of the more prestigious ones in Boston. But it's something that we can take control of.
Right,
And the precepts of pranayama, even if you do this for about 5 to 10 minutes a day or twice a day, the memory of the practice starts to linger outside of it. So it's not just a state effect, it becomes a trait effect. And that's what we're looking to do.
right.
By just focusing on breath as a practice for a few minutes each day, how do we change our lives internally, outwardly, for the better?
Now I should ask you too because it does seem so, you know, risk free, but that's not always the case, right? I mean, there are some people with some conditions where some techniques are not safe and others are good. So how do you screen someone, or how would somebody even screen themselves to know this would be helpful to me and this may be harmful for me?
So that's a very, very important point that you raised, Seema, because breath, as wonderful as a friend it can be, it can also be a very dangerous foe. Because what you're doing with breath work, in addition to becoming a slow, large volume, nostril upright breather, is sometimes with the fast practices, you can create brisk ventilation. And that borders on sometimes hyperventilation. And that's what you want to avoid.
Hmm.
Because pranayama is about the yama aspects, it's about controlling breath. It's not getting to the extreme, it's getting to the edge. And so there are certain states where you'd have to be very careful in terms of how fast you breathe, how low volume you breathe. Uh, I would be careful about anyone with unstable cardiovascular control, blood pressure, heart rate rhythms. I'd be especially concerned about those who are on supplemental oxygen, who have, very advanced lung disease. But there are still some amazing practices that even those patients can do. The
Right.
slower rhythms, the posture retraining that can have benefits. So there are some states where you really want to be cautious and not get to the extreme.
So when we go more in depth on this in the cardiovisual series that you're going to share, we'll definitely go into the exact exercises that are good for cardiovascular patients, right? On those different conditions, and you can let them know specifically what is good and what might may be a little bit dangerous.
Most definitely, most definitely. I'd say that, breathing practices are free. Literally, it is one of the easiest and the safest things to do. But there are restraints to each practice. And as we cover ground with some of these exercises in this series, I'll be sure to point out, what are the conditions where there needs to be restraint.
All right. So as you've been teaching this with Breathonance, you've taken a different take on it by incorporating music, right? How did that idea come, and why incorporate music?
So this was pure serendipity. I live in Boston, met my friend Clint Valladares, a few years ago. He took an online workshop that I was teaching. And as I started to teach this, he would come back to me and say, hey, rather than using a metronome, why didn't you listen to this musical rhythm that I've created? And he's a musician, he's a very talented keyboard player. And when he started to play these rhythms, and I started to introduce these rhythms to the other participants in the class, it was like this aha moment.
Mm.
Musical rhythm has its own soul, it has its own calm, has its own magic. And when you combine the rhythm of musical melody with the rhythm that is breath, then suddenly the synergy is exponential.
Mhm.
And people were finding that they were doing it much easier. 5 minutes would feel like 30 seconds.
Mm.
And it felt to me that this was the next step in our journey, trying to combine music with breath as a practice to enhance both.
So I'm going to bring in Clint. Your friend Clint is with us now. Clint Valladares, thank you also for coming in and joining us.
Thank you, Seema. I'm excited to be here.
Uh, so you have a very interesting background from Berkeley School of Music, correct? That where you work to Bollywood, right? Composing for Bollywood. So yeah, tell us a little bit about your musical journey. In fact, what was the first musical instrument you played? At what age?
Uh, I would say I started playing banging on drums because it was in my house. Uh, and my parents wanted to keep me busy, so they'd say, okay, go and play some drums. Then I played piano very young at 5 years old. But the access point where we had a drum set in our house in Mumbai, in Bombay, and a piano, and any musician who wanted to rehearse was our house was available to them at no cost. So my dad, welcomed musicians to our house. And we had not only musicians who were great, jazz piano players, but also musicians who were playing other styles of music, including rock and choirs. So listening to, just not just melody, but harmony as well with choirs opened my mind to the beauty of music and how different elements of the music can touch our soul in different ways.
That's a wide exposure at a young age. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
That was very, very early in my life. And then I decided, I needed to take it to the next level. And my parents were really kind and supported me in playing in bands very early. I was playing professionally at the age of 14 and then transitioned on to come to the US. And when I came to the US, I was kind of a big fish in a small pond there and came here and got my little behind kicked a bit. So I realized, well, there's more to music than just playing and performing, but also healing. And I was always in search for somebody I could work with to change people's lives through music.
When you both met and started brainstorming about breathonance and music, how do you even begin to compose music to pranayama breath work?
Yeah, Dr. Anand had set the platform already. I didn't have to do too much. I would follow his guide, which was, I asked him, Dr. Anand, what are you using to know that people breathe in for 4 seconds in and 4 seconds out, or 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out, whatever it may be? He said, I use a metronome. And I thought, well, that's a lame instrument. It's not really an instrument, it's just to guide your rhythm. So I thought, what about, we have a soul, we have a rhythm in our internal body. For example, we have this heartbeat. You could do it here. And if we can use that rhythm to that's low down as a platform and a foundation for us. That's what a drum set does for you when you dance on the dance floor, but so does a heartbeat. So we started there. And then, we'd bring in different elements. How can we approach the music with what inspires our patients, our clients, our customers, and make breath work easier for them to do the work.
Right. Because I imagine then
And
it's
that,
just instead of just listening to these instructions of trying to do these techniques, but doing it along with music just makes the process so much easier and accessible, right?
yeah, we wanted it to touch not only your heart, but your soul deep within, your body and mind. There's inspiration that comes from classical music or pop music or, African rhythms or Indian rhythms.
So there's some music that could be just distracting, right? If you're trying to do this. And so, um, is there specific instruments that you use to keep people focused on their breath and a certain tone that you have to use?
Yeah, we'd start with, what is natural to you? So, you don't want anything that distracts you, that takes you away from the breath work, because ultimately it's not about listening to the music and forgetting about doing the breath work. It's doing the breath work and the music just supports you. So we have music that amplifies and excites and uh, permits you. It's kind of like being the peloton of breath work. So it's just a guide.
Why don't you show us, Clint, a little bit like something basic that we can see the music working with the breath work?
Yeah, I think I'll just show you a demonstration a little bit of like how we approach this. And you're breathing in, you go, that's a breath in, inhale, that's exhale. So when you exhale, you're guided by the chord. The change in
Yeah.
chords guide you. So you don't necessarily have to be like, when do I exhale? The chord changes. When the chord changes, you know you have to exhale. Most people know what a chord
Right.
change is. They
Yeah.
ear picks it up. And then when you start the practice, so the heartbeat starts, and then there's a little bell that tells you, hey,
So
now it's time
much
to go.
better than counting in your head, right? Of like 4, hold, release. It's like, ah.
Yeah, I had to find somebody who had a soothing voice, and it was Dr. Amit. So, you have that beautiful, husky, cool voice guiding you, like Michael Jordan on the dance floor, on the
Oh,
basketball
stop.
court.
And then the
He's guiding
music.
you. So yeah, we have that. So it was
Mm,
this magic coming together with all these elements. We want to take you to a
yeah.
spiritual place, not a religious place, but a spiritual place, a place where you feel comfortable that you can be on this journey. And let's get that feedback loop where you, as a practitioner, tell us, hey, this is working for me, or this is too much for me. I like this kind of music, and we're going to customize it and learn from you. And that's where the research is, and that's where we're on this journey.
Speaking of the research, what you are bringing is, as we said before, the pranayama breathing practices that goes back thousands of years in India. What have you seen in the research that supports the ancient text? What is lining up? Where is the evidence to support what was discovered? God knows how thousands of years ago.
Yeah, so from a purely physiological perspective, um, the research on breath has exploded in the last 20 years. The impact on making, breath work as a tangible routine in your life, and what does it do to impact, wellness and disease states through the autonomic nervous system. That's how it works. Has just grown exponentially. The role of breath on cardiovascular function, the role of breath on gas exchange and pulmonary mechanics, the role of breath on mood disorders, anxiety, depression, panic, PTSD, the role of breath on sleep. One of the most important things we do as humans, but we don't do enough of or do well of. So there's a lot of stuff that's happening. In fact, I've just done some work last year on spinal cord injured patients who have such chaotic cardiovascular control, teaching them a 5-minute routine of ujjayi, And it's remarkable how coherent everything becomes just with breath in terms of blood pressure, heart rate, gas exchange, and even sleep. We hope to do something with patients with interstitial lung disease, people who are really struggling to breathe because they are hypoxic. Their lungs don't work all that well. But the applications are numerous, just in terms of human physiology. And then you come to the neuroscience of all of this, which is also being explored in terms of degenerative conditions, whether it's post-stroke or whether this is someone with Parkinson's. There's a lot of work now being done on breath as a practice to sort of enhance some of those circuits which have been disturbed or destroyed. And now you throw in music on top of that. There's another world that sort of opens up. There's some good stuff that's come out of um, Stanford. Dan Bowling has written some beautiful work on the role of music in certain neurological conditions and certain mood disorders. I think all of these worlds, rather than working in silos, as you said, they need to collide and collaborate, if you will, for this to become really valuable in day-to-day life.
Absolutely. I think it's, furthering the understanding, the importance of it, and just bringing this wisdom together. It's like, why not, right? It's fantastic. This is going to be a really wonderful series to do on cardiovisual, and all of these terms will be defined further for people and broken down right into short exercises that people can follow along with. So this is the teaser, the background and the teaser.
Was so excited to collaborate with Cardiovisual and give them a glimpse of this time-tested tradition of pranayama, now synergized with music, but all done under the umbrella of science, with safety as a guiding principle.
So thank you both so much for being here and for doing this. It's very, very exciting to learn and great work.